and it's nighttime at this point, and they're driving along, and they see a UFO, and it comes swooping down, and they're all looking at it and becoming quite excited about it. When they realize the hitchhiker is not there, he has mysteriously disappeared. And next thing they know, this craft is coming down, landing, and out steps this figure, and it's the hitchhiker, only he's not dressed the way he was before. He's now dressed in a full piece, jumpsuit.
Yep.
We often see these ETs do. And they were all pulled on board.
Well, UFOs chasing cars, ETs taking a fancy to our fertilizers, people acting violent towards ETs, and hitchhikers who turn out to be from another world. Ace researcher and author Preston Dennett has just released the 4th book in the Not From Here series, and it includes aspects of the UFO phenomenon that you've never seen or heard anywhere else. And Preston's joining us now. Hi, Preston.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm really good. Some great material in this latest book that you've gathered. Is it all new material, or is it results from articles that you've written in the past?
Well, I would say a little bit of both. These are articles I wrote, most of them. Some are actually previously unpublished. But yeah, these are mostly articles that I wrote for various magazines over a period of decades, really. I dug them out, and I'm like, wow, a lot of my research has kind of been buried in history.
Mm-hmm.
So I pulled them out, and I expanded each one actually to about double its size, adding new cases. And I think most of these are cases people haven't heard before. Some
Mm-hmm.
are, of course, famous.
Yep.
And that would be the trigger that would, kind of prompt me to dig a little deeper and discover these interesting new and kind of bizarre patterns to UFO contact.
Yeah, as a UFO buff myself, I mean, I love to read new stuff, that I hadn't heard before, and it just strikes me that there's so much that's never been reported, and we keep hearing about the same things all the time, Roswell and Rendlesham Forest and whatnot. But some of the stuff we haven't heard about is almost as compelling, if not more compelling, than say the Roswells.
Yes, Roswell. I love the case. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Still the grandfather of all UFO cases, but it's been a bit beaten to death. And there's a lot. This field, as you know, has layers and layers to it, rabbit holes. There's still quite a lot that hasn't been fully explored. It's a relatively new field of research.
Yep.
Even though it's been around for decades, there's still a lot of questions surrounding this whole phenomenon.
Okay. You seem like you've covered different aspects of the UFO phenomenon in this book, not just people witnessing a UFO.
Oh yeah. With these volumes, I've tried really with each one to stand alone. I mean, this is a 4-volume, soon to be 5-volume series. But I think each book provides enough material to give a broad spectrum and really give a person a full comprehensive understanding of the UFO phenomena, with everything from sightings to landings, face-to-face encounters, onboard experiences, crash retrievals, the whole deal.
Yeah. The series, Not From Here, you want to give people a greater understanding of the UFO phenomenon, but do you come away with a better insight of perhaps why UFOs are here and the ET presence is here on this planet?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of why I wanted to do these, because I think there are a lot of questions surrounding like the ET agenda. Why are they here? What are they up to? Where do they come from? And there's a lot of high strangeness with this subject. And some of these are subjects that I don't think have gotten a whole lot of attention. Some of the aspects, I should say, of UFO contact are so strange, so rare, that they just haven't been studied or fully explored. So I kind of was picking little areas that I don't think have gotten enough attention, or that might perhaps reveal some insights into the nature of this phenomenon. That's why
Yeah.
I'm having a lot of fun with this.
Yeah. Do you think that high strangeness and the fact that they're so rare and, you know, what actually takes place is a reason that perhaps they haven't been reported on more than, say, a straightforward UFO sighting or interaction?
Yeah, 100%. This is a pattern I have noticed. Most people, as a general rule, do not report their encounters at all. And that's just a simple sighting. But if you're talking about an onboard experience or something that has very high strangeness levels, almost nobody reports these. And so some of these are incidents. I mean, I do have a chapter in this latest book about levitation, spontaneous human levitation following an encounter, which really has gotten no reporting on it at all until I started uncovering my own cases. And I remembered a few from other researchers, and I thought, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that probably most people aren't talking about, because it's just, who's going to believe that you actually physically levitated?
Mm. Is this about people levitating on their own or being levitated, say, from a bedroom through a wall and up into a craft?
No, levitated on their own without any UFO presence, but connected to a UFO
Wow.
encounter. Yeah, in that, I mean, a case from Jacques Vallée is a good example. He's a very well-respected researcher who interviewed a gentleman, a medical doctor from France, who, after being struck by a beam of light from a UFO, and perhaps had missing time in an onboard encounter because he did have a little triangular mark on his stomach, as did his infant son. But following this encounter, in the weeks that followed, he had 2 spontaneous levitation experiences. There was no UFO lifting him up. This happened to him as, I think, sort of a result of his encounter, a symptom, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Was
Twice.
he? Yeah. Was it a case where he levitated on his own, or it just happened?
He didn't was he had no control over it. It really
Oh,
quite
okay.
him. But yeah, he did it on his own. It was just spontaneous. There are cases where people felt they had a little bit of control over it, but generally speaking, no. It just suddenly happens following an encounter. Happened to Whitley Strieber, actually.
Mm-hmm.
He reported a case like that in 1986. Just woke up one evening floating near his ceiling
Wow.
on his wife. And happened to Stephen Greer, who's very high profile in this field. When he was a teenager in the early 1970s, he had an encounter. It was a very benevolent encounter. He was set down, exited the craft, and was walking home when suddenly he started to realize he was floating and kind of just taking these big leaping bounds, 20 feet at once, and would later
Gosh.
have another experience like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I collected about a dozen cases like that. I'm like, wow, this is absolutely a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of the chapters you cover in the book. Let's run through some of the others, and one that I always find fascinating are car chases. You know, and usually at night you're out on an open highway. We talked about there's a stretch in Australia between South Australia and Western Australia where there's a highway there that has had people report being chased by UFOs. So it's definitely something that happens.
Oh yeah, UFOs do seem to have a real attraction towards chasing cars down highways, especially remote highways late at night. And of course, Australia has one of the most famous cases in the world of uh, this first chapter, actually, which are UFO car lifts. This goes beyond just chasing a car. They will actually lift it up in the sky. And in 1988, the Knowles family, uh, with Faye Knowles and her 3 sons, were traveling along the Nullarbor Plain,
Mm-hmm.
very remote, and won't get too into it because I'm sure this is a pretty well-known case.
Yeah.
But yeah, lifted their car up 6 feet off the ground, set it down, blew out a rear tire, left dents on the hood of the car, and they did go public. I got to give them kudos for that, even though they did suffer a lot of ridicule from the media. But that was the case that really got me interested in it. And it wasn't until I was writing UFOs over Nevada, here in the US, where I uncovered 3 cases in a row. And that's got me to look deeper into this.
Hmm.
And I have to tell you, I was shocked to find, some 20 or 30 cases of cars being lifted up. And most of these are not, missing time abductions, so to speak. These are cars just being pulled up off the highway, carried
Yep.
for anywhere from a few hundred yards, quarter mile, a mile, in one case 6 miles above the road, generally speaking, right along the road, and then set back down.
Mm. Denise Stoner, who works for MUFON here in Florida, in her one of her experiences back in '81, traveling through Colorado, and she talks about how she was traveling with a family and how their car was basically lifted off the road, taken a short distance, and then basically dropped on the side of the road, and then her experience followed after that. So yes, it's definitely a something that happens.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, there was a case in Elko, Nevada, 1999. I mean, these cases go all the way back to the 50s. The earliest one I could find was 59. But a case in 1999 in Nevada involved not just a little automobile, but a big rig, a truck.
Hmm.
This gentleman had stepped out of his truck because he saw an unusual object flying around in the sky. And standing next to his truck, when this thing comes zooming towards him, it quite frightened him. So he jumped back into his truck and tried to accelerate away. But the truck wasn't moving, and he looks
Right.
down and sees that he is 6 feet in the air, just being levitated. In this case, the truck was not carried any distance, which is what usually happens in these cases. It just lifted him up and set him down. But yeah, there are some cases that are just beyond bizarre. There was a case in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1983 to a lady by the name of Catherine Burke. She had a UFO come over her car and didn't lift it up fully, but lifted it up onto its 2 left wheels. So it's kind of traveling at a
Yep.
45-degree angle.
Wow. Wow. What about there's other chapters in the book. There's one that kind of amazed me regarding the U.S. Independence Day, July 4th, and as the most prolific number of UFO sightings that take place are on July 4th. Is there a reason for this?
Yeah, I really looked into this because I was getting reports of UFOs on the, Independence Day, and I kind of dismissed them because my immediate thought was, well, these are probably fireworks. It's not a good day to see a UFO, I think, because that's what people are going to assume you're seeing. I mean, April 1st might be just as equally a bad day.
Yeah.
People are going to think you're joking, but this is apparently a thing. After receiving several reports and hearing some buzz about this on various UFO groups, I decided to investigate. And first thing I did was look into MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, in New Fork, the National UFO Reporting Center, because they receive anywhere from 5 to 20 reports a day, generally speaking. And looked into July is the most common month, but the most common day to see a UFO is absolutely 100% July 4th. They receive anywhere from 50 to 100 reports on that day. And I initially thought, yeah, these are probably fireworks. And as I started wading through the thousands of accounts, I thought, perhaps some of these are what we call sky lanterns, party
Right.
lanterns, little candles. You put a paper balloon. And I studied those accounts because these these sky lanterns can reach 4,000 feet. They stay aloft for about 15 minutes, and from a distance are quite dramatic looking. I mean, they look like a UFO. They can hover in place and dart around on wind currents. But after examining all these accounts, yeah, many of them did fit that profile, but a lot didn't. Some of these were clearly metallic craft. Some did look like sky lanterns, except they were visible for the entire duration of the fireworks show.
Yep.
So it could not have been that, or they were darting around. Some of these were metallic craft with portholes. in a few cases, beings looking down. And it became very clear, just based on the testimony from the witnesses, that these craft were coming because of the fireworks. This is what most of the witnesses felt. They'd show up when the fireworks show began, stay there for the entire duration,
Yep.
and then leave. And it went beyond that. And I started to, have some interesting insights, I think, into what was going on here. Because sometimes they would put on shows themselves. They're like, you think the fireworks are cool, watch this.
Yeah.
And they would release smaller craft or flash their lights or dart around. I mean, there was a case in Glen, Mississippi, where a mother and her son were shooting off fireworks, and a half dozen UFOs showed up. They're, not super large, about the size of a pickup truck, they said, but started darting around in a clear display, wanting obviously to be seen
Mm-hmm.
for a good, 30 minutes or so, until military jets showed up and chased them off.
Wow.
But I think what we're looking here is these UFOs putting on a display. This is a term that UFO researchers have long coined, years ago, because normally UFOs are somewhat evasive, but sometimes they want to be seen. Waves like the Gulf Breeze wave, or
Mm-hmm.
in Florida, or the Hudson Valley wave in New York. They are putting on a little publicity campaign. And what better time to do this when there's the 4th of July and there's literally 1 million people out at night looking up. This is a perfect opportunity.
Yep. Yep.
What's really interesting about these cases is, by and large, they're simple sightings. What under the J. Allen Hynek classification system we would call close encounters of the first kind.
Mm-hmm.
Simple sightings, whereas the second is physical effects on the environment, and the third being, of course, direct contact. But there's a new term, close encounters of the fifth kind, which is human initiated contact.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, you could actually label all of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're drawing them down with fireworks. This is a known thing. They are attracted to that.
Yeah. Well, it obviously sounds like ETs are, partial to a good fireworks display. I wonder, you mentioned there was some people saw figures in portholes. I mean, I wonder if there's an ET standing there with a smartphone taking snaps of the fireworks for his family album.
Yeah, I wonder about that. It's amazing because so many cases of this, the people feel that they were absolutely there to watch the fireworks. I mean, one case really stuck out to me, which occurred in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and involved this structured object, which the witness estimates was no higher than 2,000 feet. It had blue and white lights. It was low enough where you could hear this object was making a whooshing noise. But he described seeing 3 sort of Nordic-looking, sort of human-looking figures with pale complexions, blonde hair. He called his father over. His father saw it too. And this witness says, and I'll just quote him, what he said directly was, "I can't get the one guy in the middle staring at me out of my mind."
Wow.
It's damn near haunting, is how he put it.
Mm-hmm.
So this really impressed him. And yeah, clearly,
Yep.
this was not a sky lantern. It's got portholes and someone's looking out at you.
Yep. Preston, I remember interviewing Calvin Parker, one of the abductees involved in the Pascagoula incident a little while ago, and he talked about wanting to take a swipe at one of his alien abductors while he was on a table. Violence towards ETs is more common than we think.
Yes, this absolutely does happen. This happened with the Travis Walton case in Arizona in 1975, where he pushed one of them down. And I became interested in this because one of my first cases that I ever investigated involved a woman who did have a physical altercation with the Greys. She woke up, they were surrounding her bed, and she was overcome with fear. I think we have, as humans, sort of a fight or flight response, something that is different or strange or perhaps threatening. And she leaps out of bed and kicks one in the neck. And she's pretty certain its neck snapped. I mean, it fell to the ground.
Wow.
She feels like she killed it. and was overcome with remorse following this. She did have a hard time in the beginning, but later was healed and had a lot of very spiritual experiences, and feels that her encounters are absolutely benevolent, which I have to say most of the people I've interviewed do feel that way, but not all. There's a guy in England who I've interviewed. I just talked to him very recently, who's not happy about his encounters, and he had this happen. He walked down his stairs one evening on his way to the restroom, which is on the far side of the house. And coming down the stairs, he saw a gray standing in his living room. This had happened before, and he blacked out. But this time he reacted differently. He ran up to it and choked it around the neck.
Gosh.
Yeah, he said it was wild because he could feel this. It was cold, firm, and leathery, is how he put it. And this little gray started swinging its arms around like a windmill, he said, speaking in his mind, get off, get off, get off, let go, get off.
Wow.
And he's like, what am I going to do? I've got this gray in my grips. And he had it like that for, 10, 20, 30 seconds or so before another one, apparently, he's not sure, but something came from behind him and knocked him out. And he woke up in bed the next morning. So he's fought with them. And another time because he can sense them coming at times. This is something a lot of contactees talk about. There's sort of an energy, or they get an anxiety. And he kind of can sense when they're in the room. He wakes up and they'll be there. And one evening he woke up, he knew they were there. He had his blanket over his head. So he felt them approaching his bed, and he quickly whips off the blanket, and sure enough, there was a gray. And he reaches back and he smacks it in the face. And he said his fist went right in. The people who have done this said that they've seen somewhat fragile and very soft and rubbery almost. It's like hitting a beanbag, is how one person put it. But this cute little gray, is how he says they kind of look cute little innocent things, kind of changed a little bit. It opened its mouth quite widely and hissed at him and showed its teeth. When he said that, I was very interested, because there's not a lot of descriptions of, Gray's teeth, but I do have a few. And I asked him, I'm like, well, what did they look like? He said, well, actually, there was quite a few of them. They were very small and sharp and pointed, which is what I've heard from other people. So yeah, not the only person I've interviewed. Another gentleman, a Marine officer, was taken on board, and you go through all this combat training, the military, and he was able to break free of his paralysis, and basically, pushed back these grays. Didn't quite like punch one in the face, but absolutely took one and pushed him down on the floor, which caused a little bit of panic among the grays, and they had to bring a bunch of them in to restrain him. So yeah, this does happen. Anne Druffel talks about this in her book about how to stop ET abductions. I don't think it's a super effective method, but it can certainly cause some problems.
Wow. Well, economically, the US at the moment is going through a tough time, and one of the products that is pretty hard to get now for farmers is fertilizer. And again, another chapter in this book talks about an interest from ETs with our fertilizer. So, what is that? Is that extensive, or is it just an isolated thing?
It's not super extensive. I mean, I really wanted to look into this because the famous Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961 really introduced the whole world to the idea of ET contact and onboard experiences. Did have this weird fertilizer connection. Following their experience, the Hills, came home and started to realize they had missing time, because there were some physical evidence of it in terms of Betty's torn dress, Barney's scuffed shoes, spots on the car that were magnetic. And they were visited by two researchers who are not well known. They've pretty much flown under the radar. That's Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, who are mainstream scientists, but started asking the Hills all these very strange questions, one of which was about fertilizer. They asked them, do you have any nitrates in your car at the time of this experience? And Betty and Barney Hill were like, "Well, why are you asking us that?" No, we don't. But upon second thought, they realized, oh, actually, we did. They had a bag of fertilizer in the trunk of their car when they were taken on board. And that seemed to really interest Holman and Jackson, who told them that they had investigated previous cases involving missing time with people who were in the nitrates industry or somehow, were associated with fertilizer. And so this became a bizarre topic of inquiry throughout the investigation of the Hills case, but was never fully solved, never really looked into in any depth following this. So I decided to take a deeper look because I did know of another case. And looking at it, there's an absolute fertilizer connection in this other case, which occurred in 1964
Mm-hmm.
to a farmer by the name of Gary T. Wilcox. This occurred, briefly in Tioga City. He was, out in his fields and saw a light coming down. This was during the day, and he went to investigate, and it turned out it was a craft. As he walked up to it, he's trying to think, is this an airplane engine that fell? Is this a refrigerator someone dumped? But as he came up to this, he saw it was a craft. He's thinking this could be military, but it was floating 4 feet off the ground. And suddenly 2 figures came out of it, and they were short, 5 feet or so, but completely covered in this one-piece jumpsuit from head to toe.
Mm-hmm.
Even their faces were not visible. And they spoke in flawless English and started conversing with them for over an hour, he said. And he absolutely refused to reveal some of these details that they spoke about, saying it was quite personal, but did say at one point that they were very interested in the fertilizer it was spreading in his field. And they talked about that for a while. He explained the purpose of fertilizer, and they requested a bag of it, which he went and got. And by the time he returned, they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
But he left this 80-pound bag of fertilizer there, and it was gone the next day.
Wow.
So they apparently took it. And I started looking for other cases that might, speak towards this connection. Didn't find a lot, but I did find a few that absolutely clinched it for me in terms of a UFO moving over the Agrium fertilizer plant in Borger, Texas, or another case which really spoke to it, I think, occurred in Winsted, Connecticut. And this was in 1968 when a 12-year-old girl had a UFO land in front of her house. They apparently didn't see her. They were interested in the building across the street, an abandoned railroad station, which was being used to house a large amount of fertilizer. And they went straight to that, walked up the side of the building, went on top of it, and were looking down in the skylight
Mm-hmm.
at the fertilizer. So yeah, there are other cases I found, not a whole lot, but enough, I think, to establish that they do seem to be interested in it, which I think ties into the fact that we do see UFOs landing and digging with their little shovels and putting soil in
Mm-hmm.
buckets, clipping plants and all kinds of wildlife.
Wow.
They're scientists and they're studying all aspects of us.
Yeah, yeah. It's just fascinating. What about hitchhiking? ET hitchhikers.
Yes, this is so bizarre. I really did not expect to find anything like this, but I heard a case from Artie Six Killer Clark, a couple of them actually, and it got me interested in this because I started to remember others that I had read about. And this is kind of my specialty, is finding patterns
Mm-hmm.
of UFO contact. I'm like, wow, that this has happened before. I mean, she described this case involving 3 brothers and a cousin who were finishing up a wedding. And as they're getting ready, they packed their car full of all the chairs and stuff, and they're going to drive home. This gentleman approaches them. He's wearing a cowboy hat. He looks like a normal guy, and asks them for a ride. But he was a complete stranger. He wasn't at the wedding. He just kind of walks up to them as they're getting ready to go. And they said, sure, we'll take you for a ride. And they all get in the car and they're driving. And for some reason, the driver finds himself veering off his normal route. And I've got about 15 cases of these ET hitchhikers. And this is what often happens. People find themselves diverted from the way they would normally go,
Mm-hmm.
which happened here. And it's nighttime at this point. and they're driving along and they see a UFO. And it comes swooping down and they're all looking at it and becoming quite excited about it. When they realize the hitchhiker is not there, he has mysteriously disappeared. And next thing they know, this craft is coming down, landing, and out steps this figure, and it's the hitchhiker, only he's not dressed the way he was before. He's now dressed in a full piece, jumpsuit.
Yep.
We often see these ETs do. And they were all pulled on board, and basically it was a typical onboard experience where they were physically separated and physically examined. In this case, they did have some memory problems that were quite severe because they woke up following this experience, and some were like so amnesiac, I guess, that they couldn't even remember their own names. It took them all about a week to fully recover, and all of them had varying levels of memory loss, but one did remember almost entirely everything that happened, and all of them do remember being taken on board. But this is sort of a dramatic case of this. She had another one involving a Native American gentleman who picked up this other gentleman who we thought was another Native American. This was in Arizona, actually. And it was the same thing. This guy was dressed a little funny, actually. He had a shiny white jumpsuit. And the Native American, his name is Dakota, is like, oh, this guy's a little unusual looking.
Yep.
Very pale, white blonde hair, kind of hypnotic eyes. And they're driving along and they come up on a UFO landed in the center of the highway. And the hitchhiker quickly jumps out of the car and walks into the UFO, comes back with another guy dressed the same way in this white jumpsuit, and pulls this man on board. So this is often a prelude to a onboard experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But not always. Some cases that's not what happens at all. They just pick up this guy, take him for a ride.
Yeah. Have you heard of any that have ended up in a bad situation for the people picking them up?
No, not really. I mean, it does, as I said, result sometimes in an onboard experience, but no one's ever been, assaulted or hurt. There's a lot of, stories about hitchhikers and the dangers of picking up hitchhikers. So it's really surprising because in some of these cases, I mean, there was another case involving two ladies driving along a remote highway in Arizona. Nothing out there, no buildings. There was no car alongside the road. And they come upon this beautiful, handsome looking blonde gentleman. And these are two ladies driving alone. They don't normally pick up hitchhikers. They never do this. But they felt compelled to pick this guy up. And he started speaking to them in this sort of sing-song voice, saying, don't be afraid. Nothing's going to happen to you. You won't be hurt. And that's when they realized their car was in fact being lifted off the highway. And they were taken on board and physically examined and so forth. But no, nothing bad happened to them other than the trauma, perhaps, of the whole experience itself.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's one case, if I may, real quickly. 2003. I like this case because it's different from the others in that there was no onboard experience. This occurred in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And this gentleman's just driving along this highway and sees a short figure alongside the road and wasn't going to stop, but found himself stopping to pick up this guy. And he immediately noticed this guy was very unusual. He was very short, shorter than 5 feet, had weird slanted cat-like eyes, and had a strange odor, no hair on his head, is a bald head, which we hear a lot, wearing a tight-fitting jumpsuit, had weird shoes on, was just weird all around. He tried talking to the guy. The guy spoke in a weird language. He said, where do you want to go? The guy spoke in an unintelligible language and just pointed ahead on the road. That's when he noticed this guy had 6 fingers on his hand.
Wow.
It's a very strange case. And his skin complexion was also very strange. and just gives this guy a ride for several miles until suddenly the guy motions for him to stop, goes out of the car. There's nothing around, there's no cars, no city, nothing. Just walks out into the wilderness. So I guess he needed a little ride. I don't know.
Yeah.
The guy's absolutely convinced this figure was not human.
Wow. That's really interesting. Kind of reminds me of that movie, Paulie.
Right.
The alien that they picked up out in the middle of nowhere. That ended up in a pretty big adventure.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that movie. It had
Yeah.
some real credible aspects to it.
Yep, certainly did.
Whoever wrote that knew a little bit about Greys and ET
Yep.
contact.
Yep. Many people don't realize that UFO witnesses and experience that go through some sort of an after effect of some description. Is this what you've found in your research?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned the levitation.
Yeah, I think what often happens with UFO contact is there's a bit of a spiritual transformation, an awakening of psychic abilities. This is a superlative experience for people, a peak moment in their lives. And it's not at all unusual for people following an encounter to completely change their lives. They will quit their jobs, end a relationship, move. They will start having out-of-body experiences, feel like they have the ability to heal, and all kinds of things go on. There was one lady I interviewed who had an encounter in Washington where a silver-suited humanoid came to her apartment building, and it was a fully conscious encounter, though she didn't remember all of it. The next morning, although she was feeling somewhat unwell, she did go to work, sits down on her computer and turns it on and blows it out.
Gosh.
And when she told me that, I'm like, I've heard this before. People who have contact seem to have an effect on the electromagnetic instruments, which I think is sort of their bioelectric field or something affecting them. But it was absolutely pronounced in her case because she called the IT guy to fix her computer, went to the copier and blew that out, which the IT guy was not happy about. And so she's like, well, after you're done with that, can you fix the copier? And went to the fax machine and blew that out. So it was clear this was beyond coincidence. I've got so many cases of this. A guy named Ramon, a Marine officer, who I actually mentioned, he's one of the guys who pushed down a Gray, but he had this happen. He says, my light bulb budget is out of control. I blow out light bulbs all the time. He ended up taking some of these to UCLA to be investigated because they said what's ever doing this look like they're exploding outwards. They couldn't figure out how these light bulbs were breaking because it was just this unusual pattern. And he was a welder as well as a former Marine officer, and there's a very expensive welding machine he works on, and he kept breaking it. It would always blow out when he went on it. And it happened so many times, his superiors finally ordered him to go to the doctor to be physically examined. They couldn't find anything unusual about his physiology. They did find what appeared to be an implant in his jaw there. But yeah, they don't know exactly why he was blowing out these machines, but I think it has something to do with the bioelectric field.
I remember just trying to think, I think it was Jacqueline Smith who I spoke to, talked about her having the same effect on light bulbs and electrical stuff, and talked about going into a supermarket at one time, and she had to get out quick because things were happening as she walked past particular areas. But that's quite amazing. Have you heard? Is that something that stays with them, or does it eventually disappear?
No, it usually stays with them, but not always. I mean, like in terms of this whole spiritual transformation, people do feel like they have the power to heal. That often does stay, or these various psychic abilities is precognition, or I mean, it goes right down the line: past life recall, remote viewing. And in the chapter in this book, which I mentioned earlier, levitation, that does seem to fade away following an experience. In the days or weeks that follow, people will suddenly spontaneously levitate which usually only happens a few times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely is common enough, because I started asking about this. I hadn't gotten a lot of reports of it, but now that I'm talking about it, and I was talking to one guy on a podcast actually, and he told me, "I'm so glad you brought this up. I have never told anybody." You know, he is a contactee, but he says, "I don't talk about this because people don't believe me." He spontaneously levitated following an experience. It happened just once.
Hmm.
But he was fully awake. There was no UFO around. He's just floating around his room. It's astonishing. I did write a book on human levitation, by the
Yep.
way, some years earlier. This is a well-verified phenomenon. We do have all these psychic abilities. And levitation has actually been proven in a laboratory setting on at least 3 different occasions by scientists.
Hmm.
So this is something we can do. And I think this is one of the ET agendas, is to wake us up to our own, and I won't call them supernatural, because they're really not. They're
No.
human abilities.
Yeah. It's just that we haven't learned how to use them yet.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah. Preston, do you think there's been a surge in interest in UFOs, especially since, say, the Pentagon disclosures and the congressional hearings in Washington in the last couple of years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the best benefit we've had from these recent steps towards disclosure, which in my mind are not really full disclosure at all. These are baby steps. We're still lying quite a bit during the congressional hearings. They flat out lied.
Mm-hmm.
They were asked, you know, have we ever shot at UFOs? And they said, no. Well, yes, we have, and it's demonstrable. I mean,
Yeah.
there are documents that prove this. The Battle of LA in 1942 is just one of many examples.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this has caused a huge surge of interest. And this is also demonstrable in that there are, you know, several hundred Facebook groups, which were sort of just lingering at, you know, several thousand members or whatever the members are. But I've been tracking them, and they are growing so
Yeah.
fast.
Yep.
So there's a lot of interest in the subject. It's now being talked about on the mainstream news. It's being talked about officially, really for the first time in decades, in terms of, you know, in Congress, and laws being passed, and NASA forming a new group, and all these new groups that are absolutely official. Like, you know, all we had was what? Project Blue Book,
Yep.
the committee, and the Robertson panel, in terms of official public study groups. And now we're getting a lot more. So I'm encouraged to see that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing the normalization of UFOs right before our eyes. It's just unfolding, and perhaps the end of the UFO cover-up.
I hope so. I'm not really, I don't think our governments are going to be truthful on this subject, because while they are making steps towards disclosure, again, it's clear they're not telling us the whole truth. They're not being truthful or transparent on this subject. In fact, the Navy said, we do have a lot of photographs and films of this, but we're not going to release them due to national security concerns, which I think is a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talking about, you know, we've got 144 sightings. Now it's up to 400. I'm like, what about the 80 years of research that's been going on?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to completely ignore the landing trace cases, the implant removal cases, the thousands of claims of people being taken on board? What about the radar return cases? Have they not even mentioned those? So I'm not too hopeful that we're going to get full disclosure. And until we see the craft, the bodies, I think that's the end game. I suspect we're going to see some more films, perhaps metal fragments, things like that. But until we can see the Roswell craft in a museum, I think that's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. You mentioned there's a 5th book coming up in the Not From Here series. Have you got a number in mind that you want to eventually produce?
I think the 5th volume is going to be it for a while. I've pretty much tapped out all the articles I've written, because while I have written over 100 articles, a number of them were excerpts from previous books, and I don't want to repeat myself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely a 5th volume, which is nearly complete. I'm working on it already.
Yeah, yeah. I love the illustrations in the book. Who did them?
My dear sister-in-law, Christine Kisara,
Mm-hmm.
married to my older brother, Mark. She's had contact, so has he. This is something that is in my family to a certain degree. But yeah, she's an excellent artist. She's won awards and has illustrated many of my books, the covers for most of my books, but has fully illustrated all the Not From Here series. I'm really blessed to have her. She does excellent work.
Great, great. Well, you mentioned that 5th book coming up in this series. What about other books on the agenda?
Always, Dean, always.
Yep.
I'm at number 30 now. The Not From Here Volume 5, I hope to have out next year. I want to put out another book on people who've had extensive contact with humanoids. So that's coming up, but more on the paranormal, out-of-body experiences. I've got a lot of books I still want to write.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of fun with this. I'm averaging about 2 books a year. I'm now doing this full time. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm able to devote a lot more time to UFO research and having just a blast doing it.
Great. So the book is Not From Here. It's available, obviously, at Amazon. Is it available in both Kindle format and paperback?
Yes, soon to be Audible as well.
Mm-hmm.
On not only Amazon, but other online retailers, bookstores, of course. I do have a website. If people want to contact me, it's just punch in my name. It'll take you there.
Yep. You've also got a YouTube channel.
I do. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. It's just about 2 years old now, but growing really fast. I'm getting a lot of great feedback.
Is there an address we can send people to?
It's UFOs and the Paranormal with Preston Dennett. But again, if you just punch in my name, it should pop right up. And if for those who don't like to read or don't have the time, I think you may enjoy the channel because I am putting out most of my research on with visuals and stuff. So having a lot of fun with that.
Right, fantastic. Preston, thanks again for giving us your time. Always great to talk to you. We'll hopefully we'll talk again pretty soon.
Hey, I look forward to it. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Preston Dennett joining us today.